I've recently upgraded from the MSI Radeon RX 5700 XT Gaming X to a new Nvidia 3060 Ti Founders Edition. Was it worth upgrading? Stick around to find out. The Radeon 5700 XT was AMD's best card in the last generation, and the Nvidia 3060 Ti is much closer to the bottom of Nvidia's new 30 series stack. But does that mean the performance is worse? Spoiler, no. But we'll get to the benchmarks later in the video. So I have the MSI 5700 XT Gaming X version of this card and the Founders Edition of the 3060 Ti. The MSI Gaming X variant of the 5700 XT is quite beefy, with 2 fans, a large heatsink, and weighing in around 1.4 kilos, instead of a single fan blower of the official AMD card. I would recommend, if you have one of these, getting a support just to avoid your card sagging. So let's look at the difference in specs. The 5700 XT is a 225 watt, whereas the 3060 Ti is only 200 watt. Both are running with 8 GB of DDR6 RAM. Both cards have 3 display ports and 1 HDMI, although the HDMI on the 3060 Ti is 2.1 instead of 2.0 on the 5700 XT. Only using display ports, for me, it's not been an issue. The 5700 XT is running with a base clock of 1.73 GHz and boost clocks up to 1.98 GHz, whereas the 3060 Ti has a base clock of only 1.4 GHz and boost clocks up to 1.67 GHz. Both cards are running on 7nm semiconductors. So far the 5700 XT seems the more powerful card based on specs. However, if you look at the core count on each of these, the 5700 XT is running on a measly 2,560 cores, whereas the 3060 Ti is running on 4,864, almost doubling the amount of cores. And this is where Nvidia has managed to get their increase in performance. Now, before you change graphic cards, particularly AMD to Nvidia, you need to remove the drivers before taking the old card out. I personally like to use Display Driver on Installer, as this will search your computer for any related files and remove them. Make sure you use this in safe mode to give you the most stability. Once you've removed all the appropriate drivers, you can replace your card. In most systems, it shouldn't be too difficult. At the end of the PCIe X16 slot where your card is currently plugged into, there'll be a little clip that you'll need to push towards the motherboard. This will then release the card. Once this is done, install the new card and push until that clip flips back into place, securing the new card. Connect the power and the display cable, then boot up the system. Next, you'll need to install the correct drivers for the new card you've installed. The easiest way is by using the dedicated Nvidia or AMD software. Nvidia has GeForce Experience and AMD has its Radeon software. Both of these are easy to use and will ensure your graphics drivers are kept up to date. Both softwares have a whole host of other features, including screen recording, graphics card monitoring, and even CPU monitoring on the AMD software. Now, you've made it this far into the video, so let's have a look at some benchmarks. Now, I've looked at 3 games specifically, that being Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Watch Dogs Legion, and the console killer Cyberpunk, which actually runs pretty well on both of these cards. I've chosen these 3 games as they're 3 of the most demanding games to play currently. The system used to run these benchmarks is using a Ryzen 5 3600, 16GB of 3200 MHz RAM, and a PCIe Gen 3 M.2 NVMe SSD. All games were set to Ultra, except for Watch Dogs, which we had to turn down the shadows as it was hitting the VRAM limit. We were also screen recording all of the tests, which we noticed around a 5% drop in frames. Let's look at the numbers. First up, we've got Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now, at 1440p, you can see that the Radeon 5700 XT is actually beating the 3060 Ti. If we look at 1080p, it's a similar story. Again, 73 frames per second average on the 5700 XT versus 64 frames per second on the 3060 Ti. Now, this game is geared more towards AMD, and that's probably where the difference comes from. If we then look at Watch Dogs at 1440p, you can see that the Nvidia 3060 Ti does have a higher average frames per second, but just by 5 on the 5700 XT. At 1080p, actually higher on the 5700 XT as opposed to the 3060 Ti. Now, looking at the CPU usage on this game, we do believe that we are hitting a little bit of a bottleneck there, which is causing the unusual numbers for the 5700 XT to be beating the 3060 Ti at 1080p. Finally, moving on to Cyberpunk. This is the biggest win for Nvidia, looking at 1440p, an increase of 11 frames per second, but nearly a 30% rise in average frames. At 1080p, again, quite a big win for Nvidia here with another 13 frames per second more, taking up to that magic number of 60 frames per second at 1080p Ultra. So actually looking at the results today, it's a bit of an interesting one and a split of 50-50. Now, Watch Dogs, it does look as though that was the CPU bottleneck, and it just shows how much of a difference that can make to your performance in gaming. On a general rule, it does feel better on the 3060 Ti, and also we were screen recording all of these, which would have dropped about 5% on the frames. The recordings for the 3060 Ti did come out a lot smoother than the Radeon 5700 XT. I think the AMD card was definitely working a lot harder than the Nvidia 3060 Ti. You also have the added benefits of DLSS in selected titles. And this essentially runs the game at a lower resolution, uses Nvidia's wizardry to upscale. This gives you more frames per second with very little cost to visuals. AMD have released their own version of this called Fidelity FX, and this will be available on both AMD and Nvidia, although from early testings, it's not quite up to the quality of DLSS. It's very early days, and knowing the determination of AMD, I don't think it will be long for this to get up to Nvidia's standard and potentially surpass it. Finally, you've got ray tracing. Now, I know the AMD 6800 and 6900 have ray tracing, but this is the second generation of ray tracing for Nvidia, and I have to say, it looks gorgeous. It seriously hits performance, but when used alongside DLSS, it gives a good playing experience with fantastic visuals. So, was it worth upgrading? Well, yes, of course it was. But I will put a little caveat that I don't think it would have been worth upgrading if I was spending more than £500 on the card. If you can get the card at MSRP, I would tell you not to hesitate, just go grab it straight away. It is a fantastic card. But in the current market with a lot of scalping going on, a lot of price hikes on eBay, I wouldn't recommend spending too much if you're upgrading from the 5700 XT. It is still a very good card. The only things you don't have is obviously the ray tracing and the DLSS, but hold out just for a little longer and hopefully prices will come to a much more respectable limit to pay. The 3060 Ti with its lower power consumption, lower clock speeds, the card's cooler, and that means the fans are a lot quieter, and this does make a big difference in an air-cooled case. Let me know in the comments below if you're thinking of upgrading to a new 30 series card, or if you're wanting to upgrade to AMD's new line of cards. While you're here, why not check out our Oculus Quest 2 video? You could use your new card for some VR gaming. Guys, thanks for watching, and we will catch you in the next one.